The sky was gray, the kind of day that creeps in slowly and leaves you feeling completely worn out. Within moments, everything I thought I had under control unraveled. Now, all I could do was sit and wonder if the worst-case scenario was about to become reality. But surrendering to hopelessness had never been in my blood. I was taught better than that. My old drill sergeant used a hammer and one principle: when in doubt, take action. Even if everything around me was falling apart, I still had one thing left: my self-respect. Fortunately, I'd gotten hold of some critical information just a day before, which gave me enough time to put together a plan. That's how I ended up waiting in a friend's vehicle, tucked away in a shadowy corner of a rundown motel parking lot. Word had reached me that my wife would be arriving that day. My heart pounded every time I caught a glimpse of a red convertible turning in. I didn't have to wait long. She pulled in, and right behind her was a man she'd chosen. Some slick guy with a loud car and a smug look. He parked beside her, said a few words, and walked off the front office, presumably to grab the room key. That was my cue. Quietly, I stepped out, walked up to her car, and slipped into the passenger seat before she even noticed. She gasped when she saw me. "Connor, what are you doing here?" I kept my tone steady as I handed her a brown envelope, just dropping off the divorce papers. "Don't bother coming home. Have a good time with your real man." Her expression drained of color. She fumbled for words. "No, wait. You don't understand. It's not what you think. I swear. Please let me explain. There's no cheating." I cut her off. "I don't want explanations, Margaret. I want a divorce. You can be with that clown, if you want, the one who just ran off to play house with you. I'm out." Tears welled in her eyes as a dream she thought she had crafted with her new flame came crashing down. Just then he returned, proudly holding the key card aloft. He spotted me in the car and looked puzzled. "Who's this guy? What did he do to you?" I stepped out calmly, retrieving a small plastic bottle from my jacket pocket as I did. Through her sobs, Margaret muttered, "That's my husband, and he's leaving me because of all this." The guy puffed out his chest. "I'll teach him a lesson for thinking like that," he snarled, stepping toward me. Before he got too close, I sprayed him in the face with a mixture of shampoo and water I prepared earlier. Blinded, he screamed and staggered backward, his hands flailing in confusion. While he was still reeling, I moved in for the next step. I pulled out a homemade dart, 3 metal tips bound tightly at the base. Quietly, I walked behind him and drove the dart into his backside, deep enough that only a surgeon could retrieve it. He shrieked in pain, howling curses through clenched teeth as he tried to pull it free. I left him there, squinting through stinging eyes, hopping in agony, dart still stuck. Margaret sat in the passenger seat, her face buried in her hands, sobbing. Without saying a word, I walked back to my car and drove away. Whatever they had planned that day, some romantic fantasy in that cheap motel, it was over. That marked the turning point in my life. My name is Connor Smith. I'm 42. My wife, Margaret, is 40. We have 2 children, Emile, who's 12, and Estelle, 9. We've been together for 2 decades, 16 of them as husband and wife. On the outside, everything looked picture perfect. Nice house, loving family, stability. But beneath the surface, happiness was always out of reach. Looking back, I blame much of our marital tension on one person, Margaret's mother. She wasn't evil in the traditional sense, but her cruelty came in constant, subtle waves that never let up. From the first time we met, it was clear she saw me as beneath her daughter. It all started at what I assumed would be a casual family dinner. I had expected friendly introductions, but instead, I found myself being interrogated. After firing off a series of probing questions, she made a declaration that caught me off guard. "I don't like your name," she said. "Connor, it sounds so common. People from refined families don't name their children Connor, or Kenny, or Molly, or Nellie, or Cindy." I sat there stunned. What floored me even more was how Margaret and her father just sat in silence while she tore into me. That's when it dawned on me. The issue wasn't just between Margaret and me. Her family would always be a part of the tension, whether we liked it or not. Her mother continued her speech, launching into a lecture about how the surname Smith had rural roots, passed down in farming family for generations. Then she turned her disappointment toward Margaret, lamenting how she had imagined a more elevated future for her daughter. It became painfully obvious what she meant when she began gushing about Margaret's sister Natalie and her soon-to-be husband, a man from an old aristocratic lineage. That was my breaking point. I stood up and said, "Isn't his father the illegitimate child from some forgotten branch of nobility? Doesn't he live on benefits and refuse to work?" Before anyone could say a word, I turned to Margaret. "Let's get some air. Will you come?" To my surprise, she nodded, and we left the house together, escaping the suffocating atmosphere. I'd known Natalie's fiancé, Alexander, since we were kids. I wasn't shocked that he'd managed to charm Margaret's oddball mother. He was always slick like that. Frankly, I was glad not to be invited to their fancy wedding. The only thing I cared about back then was my connection with Margaret. Our bond grew stronger, maybe too quickly. One surprise pregnancy later, and things became real. When her mother found out, she exploded. She hurled insults over the phone, making it crystal clear she wouldn't contribute a cent to our wedding. But we didn't care. We tied the knot in a small ceremony, surrounded by the people who actually mattered to us. Afterward, we moved over 30 miles away to a new city, both landing stable jobs. That distance gave us much-needed breathing room from her mother's toxicity. Her mother redirected all her attention to Natalie and Alexander, which was fine by us. Not long after we married, Margaret suffered a miscarriage. It was heartbreaking, but we made it through together. 3 years later, we welcomed a son. Then came our daughter. With 2 kids, life settled into a rhythm, peaceful, content, even successful. We were both doing well financially. We bought a beautiful house and surrounded ourselves with loyal friends. The physical aspect of our marriage remained satisfying, and with Margaret's family no longer nearby, their meddling influence had mostly faded. Her parents never made the effort to visit, and when we traveled back to our hometown, we naturally split up. Margaret went to see her family, while I spent time with mine. Eventually, even Alexander grew weary of his controlling mother-in-law. Ironically, his career was taking off, and when an opportunity came along that required him to relocate almost 50 miles away, he jumped at the chance. The decision sparked several intense arguments between him and Natalie, until finally, he presented her with a stark choice: move with him or go their separate ways. She chose to go with him. And just like that, Margaret's mother suddenly remembered she had another daughter to focus on. From then on, Margaret began receiving daily phone calls, during which her mother relentlessly criticized me. She constantly compared our life to the so-called perfection that Natalie and Alexander had achieved. The tension this created began eating away at the foundation of our relationship. I tried to be honest with Margaret, telling her that Alexander had really moved to get away from her toxic mother. Instead of helping, it just led to more heated arguments between us. Things went from bad to worse when a new colleague joined Margaret's workplace. He was loosely connected to a noble lineage, and Margaret became fascinated by him. She started referring to him as a real man, or even jokingly as Superman, clearly drawing comparisons between him and me. Despite being married, this man's wife was working abroad as a nurse in Asia and wasn't due back for a few more months. They were planning to purchase a home together when she returned, but for now, he lived nearby, renting a room from his sister-in-law. Margaret's admiration for him grew unbearable. She picked apart everything I did, my tone, my outfits, the way I expressed myself, and constantly hinted that he was superior in every way. There was no winning when I was constantly measured against this fantasy man. Although we were still physically intimate, her interest had cooled. Remarks like, "Again?" or "Don't you ever get tired?" started slipping into our bedroom conversations. I often wonder how long I could keep this up if it weren't for kids, or the fact that Margaret, despite it all, remained faithful, an incredible mother, a fantastic cook, and someone who still took great care of herself. When it came to parenting or keeping up the garden, we made a great team. But the warmth that once filled our marriage was slowly being replaced with bitterness. The sweet woman I had married had turned into someone distant and sharp-tongued. I wasn't one to bite my lip and take it. I gave as good as I got, And that only made things worse. One night, after the children had gone to bed, Margaret made another jab. "I just wish you were more like my co-worker." That did it. My patience snapped. "If you think he's so amazing," I snapped, "why don't you just take off with him? But if you cheat while we're still married, know this: there will be consequences. If he's brave enough to mess with another man's wife, he better be ready to pay the price." Margaret's face flushed with rage. "You disgusting pig. How dare you say that to me? You'll regret this. Just wait." I responded coldly. "Wouldn't it be fairer if he paid instead of you?" She exploded, and I screamed in frustration. But before the shouting could escalate any further, our kids, crying and terrified, ran into the room. Their fear snapped me out of it instantly. I focused on comforting them, trying to calm the storm we had unleashed. After that argument, we both fell into a cold 2-week silence. The first weekend, she took the kids to her parents. The second, we had visitors, Natalie and Alexander. During their stay, Margaret pretended to be the perfect wife, smiling and affectionate. But the moment they drove away Sunday morning, the mask fell. Once the door closed behind our guests, Margaret turned to me and said, "Don't think I'm doing you any favors from now on." Things spiraled even further downhill. That Thursday, I received an unexpected call at work from a woman who introduced herself as one of Margaret's co-workers. She didn't waste time. "There's a new guy in our office, very good looking, and now 3 of us, including your wife, are trying to catch his eye." We reminded her she has a good husband, but she didn't care. She's now bragging that she's the one who got him and plans to meet him at a motel tomorrow. I thanked her calmly and asked that she keep our conversation private, so I could handle it on my own. That evening when I got home, Margaret was in unusually high spirits, but I couldn't shake the weight of that call. I remembered something one of my old Army sergeants had told me, how the Apache warriors would strike without warning and vanish into the desert. They believed in speed, precision, and surprise. I wasn't the violent type. I wasn't planning a brawl, but I could certainly use the element of surprise. Margaret once bragged that her new interest had a black belt, so a direct confrontation would be risky. I needed an edge. Pepper spray was illegal in our country, so I had to come up with something else. After a bit of thinking, I settled on a small bottle of diluted shampoo. I tested it on myself. It stung enough to buy time. Then I remembered another story my sergeant told about the terror Apache arrows with barbed heads inspired during the old frontier battles. That idea took me to the basement. I dug out an old dartboard and crafted my version of a barbed dart. Using sewing needles, I carefully attached angled tips to the end of each dart to make them difficult and painful to remove. A direct hit would likely send someone to the hospital. I didn't test them out. I simply hoped they'd do the job. My plan was simple. Deliver divorce papers, temporarily blind him, then stab him with one of those barbed darts. I doubted he'd be eager to continue the affair afterward. Friday morning, Margaret dressed provocatively, but I acted as if I didn't notice. Everything went as usual. Later that day, I swapped vehicles with my co-worker and friend, Eric. We often exchanged cars when he needed my bigger vehicle. I stopped by the courthouse, picked up the divorce paperwork, and filled out during my lunch break. I also managed to find the email address of the man's wife. She was working overseas through a charitable organization and planned to inform her of what was happening. Around noon, I drove by Margaret's office. Both her car and the other guys were parked out front. They had clearly had lunch together and were likely heading to the motel soon. I picked up a couple of hot dogs and drove ahead to the motel to wait for them. Everything happened just as I had anticipated. The plan worked perfectly. My training hadn't been wasted, and in my mind, I silently thanked that old sergeant once again. Around 5:30 that evening, the woman who had warned me called again. "Were you there today?" "At the motel?" she asked. I replied. She let out a sigh. "Well, I don't think your wife or her friends were too happy to see you." In an attempt to break the tension, I handed Margaret the divorce documents. Unsurprisingly, it didn't lighten the mood. Her so-called partner got aggressive, forcing me to defend myself. Let's just say he walked away with some painful injuries in a very uncomfortable place, and I'm fairly sure Margaret ended up rushing him to the ER. With a dry tone, I told the woman on the phone. Their little romantic escape didn't go quite as planned. But yes, what you heard is accurate. I have no reason to fabricate any of this. Margaret still hadn't returned home, so I suggested the caller try reaching out to her directly. Give her mobile a try, I said, though I can't promise you'll hear the full truth. She thanked me and asked for Margaret's number. I gave it without hesitation, hoping their conversation wouldn't escalate. Later that evening, I sent a detailed letter to the wife of Margaret's so-called dream man, the one currently working overseas as a nurse. I laid out everything, the emotional betrayal, the lies, and the near affair. By 6 o'clock, Margaret finally walked through the door. The storm in her eyes made it clear she was furious. We need to talk. Now, she demanded, her voice sharp. I was ready. So, did your little getaway deliver everything you hoped for? I asked, because if you thought I'd sit back while you and that guy made a fool out of me, you clearly don't know me. She snapped. He didn't lay a finger on me. You hurt him so badly I had to take him to the hospital. You'll pay for this. I shrugged. Actually, all of us will. You, me, him, and most painfully, our 2 children. That's the price for the mess you created. And if you think his wife overseas is sitting comfortably after reading my letter, you're wrong. Now she knows exactly who she married. Margaret's voice cracked with outrage. You really wrote to his wife? That's cruel. She didn't deserve that. I stayed calm. I never threatened you. I'm simply asking you to sign the papers. 6 months from now, you'll be free, with a fair deal. But if you drag this through court with a lawyer, it'll only cost you more, and the outcome won't change. That's when the gravity of the situation started to sink in. Her eyes filled with tears. Oh my God, you're actually serious about this, she pleaded. Please, just listen. I haven't done anything wrong. I interrupted her. You've done plenty. You sided with your mother, constantly putting me down just because I wasn't born into wealth. You let her manipulate you into becoming someone I barely recognize. You insulted me, flirted openly with a co-worker you held in higher esteem than your own husband, and competed with your colleagues for his attention. I paused, then delivered the final blow. You left work early to meet him at a motel. That's enough for me. You know I have zero tolerance for betrayal. There's nothing left to discuss. Margaret broke down, sobbing harder. I didn't cheat on you. I swear I never crossed that line. I only love you. Think of our children. I looked at her, numb. The only reason I didn't throw you out months ago is because of the kids. But I've had enough of hearing how I don't measure up to your fantasy man. I know what you planned. I know about the motel. I've been humiliated beyond words. I won't pretend anymore. She realized it was over. We began discussing the terms of the divorce. Eventually, she signed on one condition. She asked that we continue living under the same roof and agree not to date anyone else until the 6-month period ended. It's now been 6 weeks since that confrontation. Oddly enough, Margaret has been acting like a completely different person. It's as if she's forgotten all the ways she used to tear me down. We've been getting along more peacefully, even doing more activities together than we had in the final stretch of our marriage. We no longer share a bed or even a room, but I don't miss the shallow gestures of affection from before. Strangely, I believe her when she says nothing physical happened with the other man. From everything I gathered, their motel meeting was meant to initiate something, but they never got that far. As for her co-worker, his wife eventually filed for divorce and left him with nothing. She even wrote to me recently, saying she's forgiven him and that he's doing okay now. With about 20 weeks left until the divorce would be final, I was still uncertain about whether to try saving the marriage we'd built over 16 years. But deep down, I knew the truth. Someone who tries to cross the line once will likely try again. When the day came, I signed the final papers and officially ended our marriage. The hardest part wasn't losing her. It was knowing I'd only get to see my kids on weekends. But that didn't last long. One fall evening, the police called. Margaret had been caught driving under the influence, with our children in the car. That was the final straw. Child Protective Services granted me full custody. I became the full-time parent from that day on. As for Margaret, Well, within a year, she was a shadow of the woman she once was. Her life spiraled into self-destruction, and excessive drinking consumed her. She didn't need punishment from me. She was already drowning in her own guilt and regret. And that's how it all ended. If this story moved you in any way, hit that like button with purpose. Subscribe for more powerful real-life stories, and tap the bell icon so you never miss a new upload.